This may be old school, but we have a good hit rate using traditional email marketing. Is this an exception to the rule, Kath?
No, it's not. Ignore email at your peril. Make sure that what you're sending out, you're not spamming people, you're giving them super relevant content. But email is still very important, especially as those people have shown interest. They've either signed up for a newsletter or they've actually become a customer already. So super important in the mix.
And I also think, Kath, would it be right to say that yes, you might be using social to socialize an engagement. Email must also be used. In other words, you're using multiple means of reaching the same audience. You're not relying simply on one.
Yeah, and Musa mentioned it earlier. Imagine you use all your email addresses and your contact points to retarget and remarket to your customers, particularly your dormant ones on social media. So it's very powerful. Yeah, email is important.
A question from Zoe, Aidan. As I understand, Facebook is removing demographic targeting, in other words, interests, behaviors, jobs, roles, etc. How will we target ad campaigns going forward to engage with the right customers? And do you target the correct market when Facebook doesn't accurately show your ads to the target market that you want to reach? This is also happening, as I understand it, Aidan, across most of the social platforms. The algorithms are constantly being tweaked and changed. So how do you manage that process?
Yeah, thanks, Zoe. Great question. A couple of things. One, I think while the digital mediums in terms of targeting are becoming more sensitive to how they allow targeting and the dangers that come with that, it's still providing you an unparalleled way to reach people that you weren't able to do with traditional media. So I would say that yes, maybe the demographic ways of targeting have been reduced, but you're still given a very powerful tool to reach people. In terms of accurately delivering the ads that you paid for or looking for on Facebook, my experience is that actually they are accurately delivered. I think the challenge comes in when you look at a more social usage of the platform and you're posting on your page and you're expecting it to reach your fan base. And all I would say is Facebook would tell you now that they've moved off that narrative now for probably 3 or 4 years and think of it as a pay-to-pay platform. This is not a platform to build up a fan base. This is not a platform to rely on organic reach because you become beholden to the algorithms. And the algorithms, as Musa mentioned earlier, are a function of the volume of people and the amount of time they spend on the platform and the amount of content on these platforms. So pay to play, trust that the ads you pay for will be delivered. My experience, that happens to the right audience. And sure, you may not have all the nuts and bolts in terms of defining the exact person you want to reach anymore, but you still got a really good shot at hitting them with digital. So I would keep that confidence there.
Question here from Michael, Kath, on the following, the idea of influencers and brand ambassadors. I have found that when you get a brand ambassador, it attracts a lot of attention to your profile, like getting a celeb to post your product on social media. The only problem, Michael says, I've come across is that it only draws attention for about a week. What's your take on using brand ambassadors as a marketing stunt?
So there are different types of influencers. As they get more and more famous with bigger followings, they're more expensive. They're typically out of reach from a costing point of view for a lot of smaller businesses. And I would caution against, spending all your budget on that. Effectively, it's a paid for placement. You're going to get a week's worth of coverage, for example, and you'll be a flash in the pan. I've also worked with those kind of contracts that just don't deliver, and it's a very difficult contract to enforce. I'm not against influencer marketing at all. I think it can work when it's clearly a commercial agreement where the value exchange is very clear. But yeah, those big sort of celebrity endorsements are nigh on impossible to achieve if you're a small business, unless your product's amazing and it spontaneously seeks traction or gets traction with a celebrity. That's gold. Very difficult to achieve.
Great question from Arash Razai, who asks, how would you mitigate waste on allocating a set budget to an efficient return on investment with a constantly changing target market?
Yes, that's a great question. I think there's probably two parts to answering it. The first part is When you think about return on investment from a marketing spend perspective, you're effectively looking at three things. You're looking at reaching the right amount of people at the correct frequency, and hopefully with the right level of resonance for it to make sense for your business. And so those variables are quite easy. In fact, on online platforms, they're a lot easier to define so that you know exactly what you're spending and what you're getting. What often happens is that when you compare that to other platforms, it becomes more difficult to compare apples with apples. So if I'm going to run a Facebook ad, when I set up the ad itself, I actually determine those variables. And so ultimately, I should be able to know that even before I spend a cent. So you mitigate the amount of money you're going to spend on people that you didn't know versus being able to spend money and not really knowing what you're going to get back. The second thing you can do is that there are really great tools that Google and Facebook have built to help you optimize efficiency using your own data sources. So if you've got existing lists of customers, if you've got existing data relating to the people you're trying to target, you can actually cross-correlate those across the platforms and spend exactly the amount of money on the exact amount of people that you need to reach. So I think those two things will help you mitigate wastage. And then lastly, in terms of ROI, I think the big thing is to make sure that you're able to get the data that confirms that when you're reaching 2,000 people from an impressions perspective, that is exactly comparable to if you spent the same amount of money on a radio or a flyer to reach the same amount of people. So I think the ROI discussion is more about parity, but it's also about expectation. So fortunately, the social platforms are really good at giving you that data even before you spend the money.
That question that Musa's just answered with regard to return on investment, how would you define return on investment?
So a large part of our audience, with our scenarios, for example, were with e-commerce in mind. So I would definitely be looking at the cost of acquisition, cost of sale. I'd be looking at the end point and working out the ROI on that. I also acknowledge that, in the life stage of a business, especially a brand new business, they need to build reach initially and consideration. So it's sometimes horses for courses, but yeah, I think if you're a e-commerce owner, you have to have a very sharp eye on what that cost all the way through, tracked through, actually resulted in terms of a sale.
And Aidan, would you agree that ROI is going to be defined by the purpose of the campaign? If it's a brand building effort, if it's a sales effort, the ROI is going to be shaped accordingly.
In the brand building world, reach, frequency, resonance are our best leading indicators, where it's very hard to create that dotted line from your ad spend right down to the purchase of a Coca-Cola in store, for instance. On the performance side, I agree with Kath. The trick that I always said to e-commerce companies is work out what a customer is worth to you in terms of their lifetime value, the repeat purchases, the broader basket of purchases they might make when they become customers, and the influence they can have on their peer groups. Once you've come up with that calculation of a new customer being worth 5,000, 10,000, 500 Rand, on the back of that, it should inform how much you should be prepared to spend to acquire that customer. And often when you do that calculation in reverse, starting with the customer value, you work out that it's worth spending 900 Rand on a customer that's worth 1,000 to 1,500 Rand. And it really allows you to start informing your budget so you can get that ROI.
Excellent. Musa, you seem to be in agreement.
I am. I mean, I think that's definitely the objective of the campaign will drive ROI. And, probably once you get more comfortable with both of those discussions, there's also the third wheel, which is effectively being able to attribute. So last click attribution in relation to at which stage of the conversion funnel did what channel, what action contribute to the sale or the purchase, right? And that's, as I said, probably the next level of understanding. But to your point, I think the objective of the campaign will drive the ROI, but there are very clear ways that you can measure whether it's performance or brand building.
Moose, we've got a great question over here from Pippa, who asks, how do you decide whether you DIY or contract an agency to do it? And at what stage does a budget determine that decision?
Sure. Thanks. Great question, Pippa. I think I'm always a proponent of learning, right? And because a lot of people are in the beginning of understanding this whole world, I always say try some DIY either which way. So get your feet wet a little bit to try and understand how ads work. Create an ad for yourself or one of your pastimes, or just do something. I think just to wrap your head around what is there. I think that'll give you a little bit more of an appreciation of where your business is prepared to go. Understanding the life that your business is in and understanding the complexity of some of the marketing problems you're trying to solve from a communication perspective will help you appreciate whether you should continue DIYing or whether you should engage with an agency. In most cases, when you find that you're in a single product environment where you've got fairly low complexity, a fairly straightforward audience that you need to speak to, you can probably DIY it for slightly longer. And that's irrespective of the budget you're going to spend. It's just because you're in a slightly less complex environment. The more complex your product is and the business that you're in, the more you probably need to lead on more of an agency expertise, especially if you're taking something like, highly complicated chemical processes and you're trying to simplify that in a one-page ad to be able to send out on Facebook. You might need a creative expertise to be able to do that really well. So I think that's very important to understand, is that your innate understanding of your product and service and the way you communicate it may not necessarily be landing in the simplest and easiest way to consume. And I think agencies do that very well. Secondly, if you've got multiple products, you've got multiple ranges that you need to manage, and it's constantly needing to be taken care of, agencies typically also add a lot of value from that perspective. So operational complexity will help you to focus on what your core business is, and then a creative partner who can simplify the messaging, make it appealing, but also manage potentially many products or many services that you might have.
Moose, when would it be fair for me to say to an agency, I'll pay you per lead you generate for me?
I think it'll be fair to say that if that is also your success metric, right? Because then you're all in. And I think some agencies are very much up for that. And in insurance businesses, where you've got a very defined lifetime value and you've got a very defined customer acquisition cost, that's actually a compelling case for an agency that is in the performance marketing space. So I think it is a very, very fair thing to put on the table. What I think you must manage is your own expectation of the agency's expertise, right? So performance marketing is a very different capability to brand building. And so where the line gets drawn typically is there are agencies that specifically will love that kind of thing because it pushes them to get you the best value, the best cost, and then they participate on the upside. Whereas a brand building agency is not necessarily concerned about getting you the best value. They're concerned about getting you to the most amount of people to be able to get the right amount of resonance and frequency. So I think that offer makes sense for performance-based agencies. Brand building agencies, probably not so much.
Excellent answer. I love that. Performance marketing. Really like that. Thank you. Aidan, I've got a great question here from Shahen, who says, pre-COVID, we do activations with tastings and allow people to taste our product. So my question now to the panel is, what are our digital alternatives to the physical experiences we used to offer and expose people to the brand?
Shahen, great question. It's one of my favorites, actually. I've got a page that I follow in South Africa called Foodies of SA, and it brings me sort of memories home. And one thing that channel does so effectively is I feel like I'm eating that Rice Krispie chocolate dessert that they're cooking. So I think part of it's in really being inventive with the creative and making it compelling and moving it quickly, and that kind of method that they use. I think an alternative, of course, is influencers, because an influencer can represent them in terms of, hey, I'm eating this, I'm trying this, I'm experiencing this, and I'm telling you what that experience is about. So you find someone that people trust to relay the experience they're not having themselves. But in the absence of the budget to do that, and some of the complexities, as Kath pointed out previously, in terms of managing influencers, even just having you or a friend or a normal person talking about a personal experience using or tasting the product is something that I see here in the US as a very powerful tool. If they're launching a new set of headphones, you'll just have an average Joe, so to speak, up there saying, hey, I'm trying these, almost kind of doing a review experience. It feels very natural. It feels very social. You're playing to the strengths of the platform. It's not high budget and can be very effective and really play to the social element of social media. So a couple of options there for you to have a look at.
So Aidan, I think in that environment, consistency would be important. For example, during the lockdown period, where South Africa really locked down hard for about 3 months or so, I noticed that what they had done at the Kruger National Park is they would drive around filming the animals, and everyone would have a real physical, emotional experience of being in the game driving vehicle so that as lockdown lifted, you try today and get a booking at the Kruger Park. That consistency, the regularity of it every morning, I think was an important feature. Would you agree?
Yes, I see what you mean in terms of keeping that continuity going through COVID, pre and post. No, I completely agree with that experience. And I think that's very much the question here is how do I keep this momentum through this difficult period? And the Kruger one's a great example for many reasons, actually, as we digress. One of which is for me over here in this part of the world, it's been exciting to go to Kruger. But two, the regeneration that's happened out of COVID for Kruger must make it a particularly exciting area to go through. But absolutely, consistency is always key.